So this upcoming weekend is the kickoff for skirmish season, yet all eyes in the Flesh and Blood community, well, they're on Silver Age.
A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando.
Hey there, my Flesh and Blood friends. Welcome back to the channel, and thank you so much for tuning in here on your Flesh and Blood Friday as we are talking Silver Age and how, in my opinion, most of the Flesh and Blood community's eyes are going to be on the format, not only headed into this weekend with Valencia, but over, the next month and change or so, headed into Sage. And I just kind of wanted to talk about it in a different format. So I just got back from my run. I was able to kind of get my head in the right space. And also in the US, it is Thanksgiving weekend, which means that the house back there, too loud to shoot a cast. So we're gonna do it out here. And I hope, I hope it comes out. I do hope it comes out. But, even though the Thanksgiving holiday is only a US based holiday, it does usually serve as a reminder to, be thankful for what we have. So I did want to thank all of you out there in the community. But more specifically, and I think it's kind of tied into a lot of today's chat, there's a lot of nuance in most of what we do, right? And being able to take time and look at both sides of an argument and really evaluate positives and negatives as opposed to just getting angry at someone who says something that you don't like, because that's the way the internet works these days. So from me to you, I am really thankful for, the vast majority of people that enjoy what we do here on the channel, which I think is really that. It is, looking at both sides and weighing everything with a grain of salt as it may be, or whatever the right proper term is. But either way, thank you. So moving into the cast, you can see, hopefully in editing, I'm able to overlay the image. But I did want to talk, as I mentioned, all eyes are going to be on Silver Age. But what I think we need to do as a community is kind of manage our expectations on this, kind of from a certain point of view, right? So right now, we are in what I'm going to call Season 0, where we have the ban list, but we're moving into Pen, right? And Pen has been promised to be it's a new supplemental or expansion, or I actually don't remember in the moment what we call it, but you get it, right? Pen is going to be all about Silver Age and getting it to where they want it to be. So Season 0, from a certain point of view, doesn't matter from a meta standpoint, but from another point of view, it very, very, very much does, okay? So the way I see this, we have kind of three things to look at in terms of meta, okay? And I don't really care about the meta itself, but what I do care about is the impacts and perceptions of the meta. So we have right now Season 0, which is pre-Pen, right, which is the ban list, and then how things are going to flush out. Now, I will be honest, even from my point of view, I don't really so much necessarily care, with air quotes, what the meta looks like headed into Pen, right? We know that Pen is designed specifically to change Silver Age, and therefore looking at what happens between now and then in terms of who's the best hero, who tops, who doesn't, it doesn't, from a certain point of view, it doesn't really matter as much, right? On the other hand, right, if we're being honest, the perception does matter. So we had this event in Japan last weekend, and I'll as we're going through, I'll throw up the images, but the meta was, very heavy Aria, but the top 8 was very heavy Chane. And, when you see a top 8 that is so, especially in this game, right? We see it in lots of other games, but by and large in this game, we don't that often see, outside of like Living Legend, to be fair, we don't honestly see super heavy weighted top 8s, right? In terms of like that number of chains, right? So that was a talking point, but then again, we have this event, which is coming up this weekend. Let's see where it goes. And then we have, so not only are we moving to different regions, but the meta, quote unquote, has time to respond. And who knows where we're going to end up, right? So that's definitely where everyone is looking. We do know that there are, a non-zero number of people in this community that will just consume deck lists and go off of that. So that's something to consider as well in terms of the impact of these events, right? And then we move into Pen, which is going to rebalance everything and kind of hit the reset button on that. And we know that Silver Age will be supported very well for the season-ish beyond, right? It's going to be in the Pro Tour qualifier in season, right? It'll be the first 3 weeks of ProQuest. It'll be in the Pro Tour. But then we move beyond that, and then who knows what we see, right? So who knows what we see? So while moving into, or moving, I guess, beyond, or moving to Pen means that Season 0 basically, from a certain perspective, doesn't matter, except that you're going to have, we're already seeing it out there, right, in very, very, very small pockets. You have folks who are like, this format's dumb, this format's not complex enough, not my words, theirs, right? It's been out there, you've seen it, you've heard it. And if all of these events over the next couple of weeks land somewhat similarly, even if it's different hero, to be fair, if it's a whole bunch, like if you put 5 chains and then 5 guardians and then 5 of something else, maybe you do make the argument that the meta can move and evolve. But the perception of that matters because the top results tell a story. As mentioned, you have the folks who chase lists, and it's going to lead, or it could potentially lead to meta fatigue or our format fatigue before that, right? I do want to reference budget culture in this discussion. And in budget culture, we have to reference Commoner because it's been around for 3-some years. It exists. And to be clear, Commoner is not Sage. But Sage as a format, at least pre-Pen, is a lot more similar to Commoner than it is to Classic Constructed. That is true. It is undeniable. Okay? So, where I'm going with this here is that in Commoner, we've seen an Ira dominance, and then you've seen Oldhim kind of as a response to that as being very good and dealing with Ira pretty well. And when you look at these top results and how folks will respond to that, if the argument is able to be made that the again, their words, not mine, but an overly reductive, simple math-based format, if that is the argument, and then we're heading into a competitive season, I think we can all start extrapolating where the conversation starts going with the, more competitive focused people. And we do need to remember in that the competitive focus thing is a very relevant discussion when it comes to Silver Age, because it's going to be on the Pro Tour. It could possibly be in Worlds, who knows? They have a long time before they need to figure that out in terms of seeing where things goes. But you understand what I'm saying, right? So what we're potentially moving into here from a, Sage entering, what we're potentially moving into from Sage coming into the scene is a culture clash, right? So if you really look at what budget culture, and again, referencing Commoner, budget culture from a certain point of view was a counter movement's not entirely true, but it was a side movement. You had a bunch of folks who enjoyed Commoner because, yes, it was cheap, right? But it's also because it was more fundamental to the game mechanics and not having to worry about pop-offs and all that stuff, right? It appeals to a certain type of person. Now, and I've said this before, but there are 2 different types of people in budget culture. There's folks who enjoyed the fundamentals of the game, and then there are the folks who just wanted stuff effectively for free, right? The folks over here on the wanting stuff for free, I don't see them as being net long-term relevant because they'll pop in, they'll pop out, and those aren't the type of people who are going to be flying to events or even driving a couple of hours, right? The activation energy for someone like that is way too high to even drive a couple of hours to go to a battle, we don't call it battle hardens anymore, it's a showdown, right? But you get the concept, okay? So those folks are not here, but the folks who are enjoying it because they want to enjoy the format and play in a more casual atmosphere, those are the folks that I am referring to kind of for the rest of my argument that I'm making. And again, there's probably folks who are unaware, but we have this tournament series here in Portland, Oregon called, now we call it Project Brew, but previously it was called the Commoner Crawl. And we went to a brewery, and within the city, folks would come and we would play casually in a competitive casual atmosphere. Not that different from a skirmish in terms of, obviously the pricing's not the same, but conceptually it was a skirmish, right? Like you're traveling across town to go to somewhere you don't normally go to play cards with people, right? Yet, we very consistently saw over the years that we'd have tournaments where no one would show up with Ira, no one would show up with Chane. And you have to ask yourself, how does that come about? That comes about from a culture of folks that want to explore and they want to have fun and they want to learn versus the objective being taking first place, right? So that is very much present in budget culture, or I should say previously has been very present in culture. And you even see that at the big weekends, right, where the atmosphere, the camaraderie, the feeling of being in a 10 o'clock or a 9 o'clock Commoner double versus being in the Commoner gold foil on Saturday morning. There's a very different atmosphere, feeling, and all of that around those, even the same weekend, same location, very, very different tournament feels, okay? So, as we move into Silver Age, which has a lot of promise, but has also been focused, or has been promised to be competitive focus, what we're going to, there is no doubt in my mind that we are going to move into a clash of cultures from that point of view, right? What we have is you have a movement on the budget side of folks who were already doing it before because that's what they wanted to do. And it wasn't in my opinion, for the vast majority of the, I talked about the people who want stuff for free, and I talked about these folks, right? These folks were not enjoying Commoner because they didn't also play CC. They were enjoying Commoner because of what Commoner brought and the culture around it, right? So as you move into this competitive focus, where now all of a sudden you have someone showing up at Commoner Crawl who's there to win at any cost. And I'll be honest, we don't call it Commoner Crawl anymore, but you get it. We've even seen that since we've shifted that format locally from being one to the other, right, into moving into Silver Age, we've seen an attitude shift as well in terms of some of the individuals showing up, right? What is their objective there? Is their objective to hang out with the folks, or is their objective to come and grind and win? A little column A, a little from column B, right? And again, everyone has their own position on that sliding scale. But ultimately, I think that it's going to be very interesting for me over the next month and change, to watch how this culture evolves. Because the competitive focused people, you saw what happened with, the LL format, let's be honest, was not in a great spot, was not super well supported, headed into Worlds. So I think that most of their feedback on that was fair, but you saw what they did to Blitz before. You've seen, they've really never had Commoner on their radar because it hasn't applied to them. But Sage is going to become very important for that competitive culture. And if it doesn't check their boxes, we know what the outcry is going to be. We know what the feedback is going to be. And that's going to be what's on your Twitters, or on your, other podcasts or whatever, which is going to kind of drive that discussion. So figuring out where we're going to land on this clash of cultures thing is interesting. And then to go back to, my previous point about, even though season 0 doesn't actually matter, the perceptions generated during season 0 will carry, right? So seeing how things progress over the next couple of weeks, I think is very important, right? Yeah, next couple of weeks, right? The next couple of tournaments. And even so we have Akabara, actually, which is January. That wasn't technically in the first 3, but this one's before Pen. We'll have spoilers by that time, so maybe things are changing, but Again, so we have really 4 tournaments, at least as of now, that we'll be able to, and there's going to be a lot of eyes on Silver Age, and they're going to be looking at these results, right? So the results over the next couple weeks are going to be a big deal. So kind of to land this and where I'm falling is, falling is not the right answer because I don't know where to fall yet, right? But what I'm going to be looking at is, does Silver Age belong more at the armory, the skirmish type level? And what they're doing with the showdowns I think is actually really great. If they were doing, in my opinion, if they were doing showdowns as a thing completely independent of having Sage on the Pro Tour, I think that might actually be best case scenario. And now, to be clear, in the long term, right, once they get sets that have limited back, right, because we're not going to have limited in pen, once you get sets with limited back and we move forward, maybe it's not on the Pro Tour anymore, maybe it's not in Worlds anymore, and then maybe it becomes exactly what I'm talking about. I think having the showdown, which is a competitive level event that can draw that, but people get to choose to go, as opposed to having it be something that people are forced to play along their way to a Pro Tour victory or to a Worlds victory. I think that itself probably is the best case scenario for us long term. Folks can still show up and play the format. They can choose to enter or not. They can still choose to show up at that format and go for, World Tour type pricing. And it's supported with specific pricing for that, or I should say entry pricing for that. That seems like a really good play to me. I'm a really huge fan of that whole angle. Putting it into Pro Tour contention. Again, I'm not someone who's going to go play Pro Tour. I'm not, right? I'm never going to be, probably never going to be at that level. So me saying I don't like it on Pro Tour has nothing to do with me not wanting to play it on Pro Tour. It has to do with what I believe the perception of the community at large to be by having it on Pro Tour. Okay. So I think that if we can, once we move past pen and the rebalance, and then assuming that things are continued to be supported afterwards, which is questionable a bit if it's no longer Pro Tour type level supported, but we'll have the World Tour support with the showdowns, at least in the short term, right? So I am net optimistic that will happen. But we do have to be honest, right? We've seen, there's a lot of support coming out of the gate on this, which is almost uncertainly, the best part of Sage, is we haven't seen this type of support on Blitz. There were many arguments made as LL as a format would be fine if it was supported well. That's not, again, not my words, other people's words. And to be fair, I argued the same on Blitz, right? So the fact that they're looking to support Sage, that's a good thing, unquestionably. Right. So I think that Sage has a bright future, but again, the internet has short memories. We all as gamers have short memories, and they're going to work on what they're working on. Remember, the teams or the dev teams are working years in the future, right? So, are they as concerned with that or current balance, and then again, trying to deconvolute, taking a bit of a sidestep here, right? But CYB, Count Your Blessings, absolutely decimated my locals. They hated it. I lost players because of it. And not only did I lose players of it, it kind of planted the seeds of we don't belong in this game anymore. And CYB, I think, is actually a really, really, really strong analogy to kind of the larger picture on Sage, right? Which is the idea of Sage is to get people into our armories, okay? Why armories? Because let's think about it, right? If your argument is, well, we can get you to the World Tour, the World Tour on $20, right? That's the tagline. The thing is, anyone who can afford to, if you're driving down the street because there's one in your town, different discussion, right? But anyone who's going to travel around the world to go play Pro Tour or whatever, and to be clear, in Pro Tour you'd have to have a CC deck anyway, so it becomes irrelevant, right? But you are not attracting someone to go travel to play Flesh and Blood because of the $20 deck thing. It's just true, right? It's not relevant within their discussion. So what we're trying to attract is to get people to our locals, to get people to our armories, to get people to our LGSs so that they can start that growth pathway, okay? So if the target is actually at the armory level, but we're making ban decisions based on what we're seeing at showdowns. You see the line I'm drawing here with CYB, right? CYB as a card was perfectly balanced at the top level, right? Your Pablo Pintores and stuff who were doing the Enigma decklist with it, it was perfectly balanced. Well, I don't know perfectly, right? But it was largely balanced within the competitive scene. But at the local armory levels, it was decimating populations. This was not my opinion. It was way out there. That's why they ended up coming back and banning the card and basically saying, we don't think the world was ready for it, right? That was the argument. So with that said, coming back to this, I am very concerned that from a Sage standpoint, we see similar type of attitudes in terms of like, well, we're using the data. We're using the data on the Pro Tour, or we're using the data from our showdowns, which why wouldn't they, right? Why wouldn't they? And again, if you're streaming games, you're seeing results go up, you have to balance the top end. But that's not necessarily what your locals are seeing. And given the disparity, especially at Silver Age, of let's get new people in through the door, you have to acknowledge that that's an overall concern. So that is something also, and that is not a short-term watch, that is a long-term watch, but it's the same type of concept, right? If Oldhim is just demoralizing people at the armory, but he's not topping events, how do the votes go, right? And then that's the whole discussion of like, which has been out there, which is kind of funny, is like, will content creators be able to affect the votes? It's like, well, no one can say they can't affect the votes, but I think what we also need to realize is like, you look at someone like me who has 1,000 to 2,000 views, you look at someone like Ashenwings who has, maybe 1,000 views on his videos. We're not, and there's a lot of crossover there, it's like, as we move this into a competitive space, or a bigger space, your content creators have less reach and less influence, and you're actually talking about someone like a Runaways or an Arsenal Pass or something like that who suddenly becomes to have the sway, if they do, but that's probably not what they're focused on, because they want to, and again, they have a competitive focus on it and not a what is crushing our locals type focus. So this culture clash phenomenon that I'm going to say we will see this culture clash phenomenon. The question is, and what we'll see, I believe, over the next couple of weeks, is to what extent that culture clash phenomenon will play out. Because if over the next couple of weeks the meta in Season 0 looks completely unbalanced, you're going to have a lot of people who form their initial opinion of this format as worthless. And then you're going to have a lot of other folks fighting with them saying, well, we don't even know because Pin's not even out yet, which is true, but initial perceptions matter. We've seen what's happened to LL. We've seen what's happened to Blitz, right? And again, you can make arguments for formats or whatever. That's not where I'm going here. But once it gets out in the aether sphere, negativity rules social media. It does. And we will see where that goes. And then we'll see where it goes from there. So, I don't know. I know there was a lot of moving parts to me making my conclusion. And I do want to bring us back to, the thankful part. I am really thankful for the fact that I can sit here and have a conversation like this, which is not all positive. I mean, I actually think it is all positive on Sage in terms of where I want it to go. But in terms of pointing out, hey, maybe not everything will work. Maybe not everything's perfect, right? I'm really thankful that we can have conversations like that, right? I've seen comments out there in terms of like, Sage is how we're going to grow the game. And that is true in terms of getting more people. But if those people are coming in and not buying booster packs because they're using chaff or they're ordering, $20, like, I don't know that Flesh and Blood grows their game from a net standpoint. Because you look at Flesh and Blood, their growth over the last, look at 2025. We actually had product constrained sets, meaning, and like, if you're a company that makes their profit via booster boxes, having a situation where you don't print booster boxes seems counterintuitive. Therefore, the event growth that we've seen has to play a part in that. And if we are not able to convert those folks to going to events and becoming a part of the larger picture, the $20, $30 or whatever that they're spending on Sage is not actually growing the company. It might grow the number of people, but if they're not going to events from a larger standpoint, you're not, quote unquote, growing the game from a company deliverable standpoint. And that is, that is a harsh truth of this, and that's where the dislikes come in. I get it, right? There's a lot of folks who I think are missing the larger picture on this just because they want cheaper game, and I agree, but you have to somehow convert that into the larger picture, and I think that's the challenge. I think that's the challenge that Sage might and probably will have, because if you look at Commoner, again, I know that a lot of folks didn't like Commoner as a format, but if you look at Commoner, there's nothing functionally different in terms of what it could have been if it had been supported and otherwise, right? There's nothing functionally different about it. Cheap, approachable. If it was supported well, both from an OP standpoint and a bans and restricted and development standpoint, there's really no reason that Commoner couldn't have become this. Now, again, I've got the, the Clash people, whatever, is like, well, it's just not as fun because hero expression. I get it. I've talked about it before. I agree. I've been one of the biggest supporters of the Commoner format for years. I agree, Commoner has its problems. I admit that, right? But functionally, from the approach of what they're trying to do with Sage, there's nothing different in terms of what they could have at least tried to do with Commoner, and they didn't. So yes, the fact that they're excited about this is good, but again, you're running into those inherent challenges with what it is in trying to convert, at least potentially, right? So back to my thankful point. I'm thankful that we can have this conversation, that I don't get all the hate mail. Because again, sometimes when you look at things from both sides and not everything's perfect, you do get a lot of that with me or against me type mindset. So I appreciate you all being here with me on Thanksgiving outside. Hopefully the wind wasn't too bad. And again, thank you and have a great day, and go Commando.